Welcome to the Volunteer Bulletin from your CEO for this week. The major area that I want to talk about, of course, is what's on everyone's minds, which is the offshore processing. So for all the volunteers of the ASRC, let me bring you up to speed with what's happened. Juliet Gillard last year tried to send people, as we know, to Malaysia. That was ruled illegal by the High Court. In looking at where to go, an expert panel was established to assess other options. From the outset, the ASRC was concerned because we knew the terms of reference of the expert panel were very narrow, and we were deeply troubled that the focus was going to be on stopping boats, turning back boats, and offshore processing. Unfortunately, our concerns were born from what the recommendations of the panel were. We were deeply troubled and concerned to see what the expert panel ended up coming up with. There were some positives that need to be acknowledged, and that were namely, one, a recommendation that refugee places should be increased from 13,750 up to 20,000, and that within 5 years that should go to 27,000. There was also the positive in taking 4,000 as a one-off to help deal with a backlog of offshore family reunification, and also a greater focus on developing a regional framework, investing more in the UNHCR and capacity building. Why the ASRC is opposed to the recommendations of the expert panel and believe that the panel's recommendations have actually failed the human rights test for asylum seekers is because at its heart it breaches fundamental tenets of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Refugee Convention. And this is reflecting the wide condemnation of these recommendations from everyone from Human Rights Watch to Amnesty International to the Refugee Council to the ASRC. At its heart, the panel recommends, as a short-term measure, but as a measure, offshore processing of people on Nauru and Manus Island. It also recommends what they talk of as a no advantage test, that people who have arrived by boat will be barred access to family reunification through the Refugee and Humanitarian Program. And it also speaks of people being processed on Nauru and Manus Island in line with what it would take to be processed anywhere else in our region. Now, why these recommendations are such a failure are because what they do is fundamentally the following. One, they punish people for seeking asylum. Two, they are based on the myth of the queue. Three, they breach some of the most basic tenets of human rights by denying family reunification. Four, they actually take genuine refugees and keep them hostage in countries where they have no prospect of actually ever being resettled. Five, they open up the door for us to repeat the horrors of the Pacific Solution last time, where we saw mass hunger strikes, mass self-harm attempts, hundreds of people, including children, stranded on these islands for months on end. Unfortunately, what we've seen happen is both sides of the political fence have grabbed onto these recommendations and have now pushed forward. Last week in Parliament, legislation was passed, and that legislation was pretty much the Malaysia solution legislation from last year, with probably just a couple of tiny amendments to it. Now what is law in this country is the following. That is that the minister can designate any country in the world as a refugee processing country, basically as an offshore processing facility. The minister, while having to seek assurances that a person won't be deported to danger on any of these countries and will be processed, has no requirement for those assurances to be legally binding. And while the minister will have to table to Parliament what a country has promised to do, in reality, if the minister can't get any assurances, there is no requirement for the minister to provide any evidence whatsoever that a person is going to be safe where they're going to be sent to, and that the minister's power is unreviewable, that the laws of natural justice do not apply, and in reality the minister is a law unto themselves. So what does this mean practically? It means our government is pushing ahead. We're sending people to Nauru in the next couple of weeks, if they can, to Manus Island, and no doubt Malaysia is back on the table despite it being deemed illegal. The ASRC is opposed to offshore processing because it is illegal. The ASRC is opposed to offshore processing because the human cost is too great. The ASRC is opposed to offshore processing because it does not deal with the root causes of why people flee in the first place, in terms of war, unrest and conflict, and then why people get onto boats in the first place, which is solely due to government policy, the failure of safe alternatives, the failure of a decent number of quotas to settle people, the failure of proper investment in the UNHCR, and the failure of a genuine regional framework, none of which are addressed by the expert panel's recommendations in reality, in terms of that they're not actually about to be enforced anytime soon, and by the legislation that's actually put forward. Even one thing that we saw of note was in the last couple of days, we dug up a report from January of this year that the government itself had tabled, had sought out about Nauru. And what did that report say? It said in reality 750 was the most that you could house, not the 1,500 being touted. That to actually reopen this detention centre on Nauru, you'd be facing a costing of $2.2 million a person. That you would have to move a primary school, a women's refuge, and housing for the disabled to reset this up. That even the most basic operationalisation of it would take 12 weeks. And to actually get it to 750 would take 5 months. Now, we already have 475 people flagged for Nauru, including at least 10 unaccompanied children. So already this policy is a failure, and already it's one that is not deliverable. And if you see Gillard in the next couple of weeks start sending people there, you have to be asking, at what cost? What are the shortcuts that have been taken? And what will be the inexcusable human toll that this practice will take? We are deeply disappointed that both the Labor and Liberal Party have supported and pushed through Pacific Solution Mark II, one that actually goes beyond even what John Howard did. And beyond the financial cost will be a terrible human rights cost to Internet's reputation, and most tragically, a terrible human cost to the families and vulnerable people that will be left in limbo for years on end in those countries, until one day Australia ends up taking them billions of dollars later, and at a great traumatic cost to the people concerned. That's your volunteer update from your CEO for this week. Thank you.